Oh, yeah, cool. All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Warlord Magni, and thanks for coming out to GOS. It's great seeing everybody. This is the some number installment of my Newb to Warlord series, where we're trying to give you all the basics or all the information to go from day one to Warlord. So today's topic is going to be on offensive and defensive fighting. So, what is offensive and defensive fighting? In general, offensive and defensive fighting is the difference is thinking about what is your initial instinct uh, to throw or block when you're being attacked. So if I'm fighting Sean and Sean throws a shot at me, am I going to be more focused on blocking that shot or returning? Okay? And so there's a wide spectrum, right? Where on one side you do nothing but block, right? I'm only going to block. Or on the other side, I'm only going to throw, which if you only throw, you're probably going to get killed, right? Every time. Whereas if you only block, I'm never going to throw and I'm never going to get a kill. So nobody wants to work on either extreme. You want to work somewhere in the middle. And different people will either sit towards one side or towards the other side, right? And you kind of need to figure out where you fit in that dynamic yourself, right? So to do that, kind of like I would work with sparring and just have your opponent just throw at you and see what your initial response is. So if Sean throws at me, right, my instinct is to always return. I'm more of an aggressive fighter, whereas some fighters are more defensive. Um, and so that's important, right? And so once you kind of figure out your own style, it's important to begin to understand how to probe and figure out what the style of your opponent is, right? Whether they're offensive or whether they're defensive, right? So now this is kind of important for you to figure out. So pick up your board, John. So board is often the easiest category to begin to feel it out, right? So how do you feel it out and figure out what your opponent does? So typically you want to throw some openers, some safe shots, and see what their response is. If I throw this shot and every time Sean just blocks it and he never returns, that means he's a more defensive fighter. He's more focused with maintaining the defense and blocking than returning. So what does that mean for me? That means that almost every shot I throw, I'm more or less going to have a free opportunity. I don't have to worry about Sean returning. But if I throw and Sean always does a counter, throw over, right? Like, oh, I now have to be conscientious of that. So if Sean is very offensive, I have to be ready for the block, right? That's kind of the difference. So you need to throw openers. You can throw threatening shots, right? Like trying to get over, but you typically want to throw safe openers. Don't throw something like really committed because like this, John can just snipe my arm, right? You can just throw at the board, throw out the hand, maybe throw low, throw out the hip. But when you throw openers, you're not really trying to hit them. You want to threat, but you're really focused on figuring out what your opponent's response is. Okay? You don't always have to throw strikes. You can throw pumps, right? So if I do this, and I just fake, and Sean throws at my sword, right? Oh, that means Sean is going to be more aggressive with me. So I have to take that into account and build my strategy around that. I can fake. What does Sean do? What does my opponent do? Right? And realize that your opponent is going to act differently over the time of fighting you, right? Over the course of the fight, which I'll talk a little bit about later. And they'll fight differently depending on who they are fighting themselves, right? So Sean will fight me very differently than he may fight any of us here or anybody else here, okay? So you can also figure out their response by using your footwork. If we're out here in C range and I do this deep lunge, what is Sean going to do? If Sean is focused on backstepping out, Sean's more focused on defending. Whereas if I come in and Sean steps in, oh, okay, Sean's ready to grind. He's ready to go, right? So then you need to figure out that response. And you don't always have to do full lunges. You can just take this step and see what happens. What does Sean do when I step offline? Right? All of these little things that you can do on the approach of an encounter. I've never met Sean on the ditch field before, or at an event or whatever, right? The first 1-2 minutes, I'm gonna feel Sean out. I'll throw these sort of shots, walk around, look at what Sean's guard is. Does Sean try to probe what I'm doing, right? Because if Sean is trying to read me while I'm trying to read him, we're both trying to solve like each other's equations at the same time. Does that make sense? Okay. So to figure out that reading, it's going to take time and experience. You're not just going to be like, oh, okay, boom, oh, Sean blocked it. That means Sean's defensive. No, it doesn't work that way. Because one shot is just one data point. You need a series of data points to build that model. Okay? So, what happens if I throw combos? What happens if I do step move? What happens if I try to fight at range control? Right? If Sean pushes in on me and I step out, does Sean keep going? Or does he just stay? Right? Doing these little tests where you're playing aggressive, playing defensive, will be able to help establish the data for you to figure out how Sean is going to respond or your opponent's going to respond. Okay? So now, say you have enough information, how do you build your strategy? Right? The easiest case is when your opponent is on one of the spectrums, right? If Sean is highly defensive or highly offensive, those are the easiest cases. So, if Sean is highly defensive, for example, typically highly defensive fighters, let's switch other sides. With highly defensive fighters, typically what they're going to do is they're going to time you out. So I'm going to throw, Sean's going to be, or highly defensive fighters will wait, and they'll just block, and they'll block, and they'll block, and then once they feel really, really safe, and they know they can get that shot, that's when they'll go, right? So like, boom, okay, right? Very staged right there, right? But if you keep fighting somebody and you realize that they don't return anything and they only throw like 1 or 2 shots and you keep dying to that, that is a perfect example or kind of a telltale mark that they are a highly defensive fighter. So how do you fight that? Typically, what I like to do is I like to make them think they're safe, make them think that I am in their game, and then I take advantage. Because what I want, if I can't get around their guard here, I need them to open themselves up. So I can either like throw kind of a risky shot and get Sean to throw, and then I can follow up, right? Additionally, realize that if you're the primary aggressor, you're going to be the one that's controlling the engagement, right? And that's what the defensive fighter wants. But what you can do instead is give that to them. And so the way you do that is now you play really defensive. So, and this is, I've gotten a lot of really good mileage out of this, where, okay, Sean doesn't throw anything, only the safest of safest shots. And so then I'll just stand here and I'll just wait. And you just play a waiting game. I will wait for Sean to throw, and then I'll capitalize. But for you to be able to get away with this, you will have to be able to see the shot coming. You have to time them out. It's going to take practice. Very rarely are you just going to be able to like capitalize on everything all at once. Okay. With defensive fighters as well, typically A range, they're going to feel really uncomfortable, right? And so they'll just like back up and back up and back up. So playing up close is, unless you can maintain the pressure the whole time, it's not really going to work out. Also, if you're fighting a board person and they're really defensive, don't leg them. That's a bad idea. Just because now they now have a high defense to start off with. I leg. I now have less to work with because there's less surface area. Now maybe I can control a little bit here. We're like, oh, okay, like I sidestep and throw for that back leg. Let's flip. Good hustle, good hustle. Right? We're like this, and I sidestep and I throw for the back leg. Maybe that'll work. But that's going to be pretty hard. And maybe like as I step forward, Sean's going to know, and if I throw and I miss, my equipment's locked. Right? It's not always the best position. So just things to think about. When you leg a defensive fighter, you're now playing into their game. I actually know a few fighters that want to get legged. Leg them because now that's even less for them to get hit. You can stand up. You're okay. So that's defensive fighters. What about aggressive fighters? Okay. I would say I'm a more aggressive fighter. I wouldn't say I'm purely aggressive, but I typically try to control the tempo and throwing several shots and somewhat overloading my opponent. If you fight somebody like this, how do you deal with them? How do you deal with me? For example, I think one of the best ways to deal with it is use your range control. If I'm controlling the fight and I want you to be in my range, if you step out of range and I can't get you to be in range, I'm going to continue to push harder and harder. And eventually what will happen is you're going to cause an aggressive fighter to throw a more risky shot, and then you capitalize. Right? So if we're fighting and Sean keeps stepping out, I'm going to throw, like if we're here, no, back up. If I'm here and like every time I step in, Sean steps out, what I will do typically is I'll throw, right? And I'll come in, but this is a really committed movement. I closed a lot of distance, but now I'm in a bad spot. I typically won't throw something like that. I'll like close and try to maintain pressure. But the point is that you push them to throw riskier and riskier shots. Okay? You try to get them to play your game rather than you playing into their game. Additionally, you can try to work on timing. So if I'm throwing all these shots and I throw in a very rhythmic motion like this, give me on the offbeat. Right? 1, 2, 1, 2. Whoa, you should have thrown for the arm. 1, 2, 1, 2. Boom. Right? This is not everybody throws that rhythmically, but you get the point. Where You try to get them in a position, or you recognize the pattern, you get their tempo. Once you feel their tempo, then you get them on the offbeat. If they throw every beat, every whole note, throw a half note, something like that. If for the musician people, I don't play music, so no. All right. Let's see. Sometimes this isn't always the best alternative, but you can play aggression with aggression. And what I mean by this is, now if I'm applying pressure, a lot of pressure, now what you could potentially do is throw more pressure at me. So yeah, oops. No, it's fine. Right, where you're really defensive to start off with, and then if you flip a switch and you now start throwing a bunch of shots, right? If I think Sean is pretty defensive and not throwing anything, I'm going to get more risky. I'm going to throw more committed shots. And then if Sean starts throwing shots at a risky moment, oh crap, I'm armed. Well, I wasn't supposed to drop everything, right? Ah, trash. But that's an example. Being more aggressive is a harder one to get away with. If you're going to be more aggressive to an already aggressive fighter, you got to be prepared to back it up. It will potentially, depending on the skill match, you may be outskilled, or like you may be playing into a losing battle, but something to be conscientious of. And then, what about the middle? Pretty much everybody fights in the middle. Nobody is pure aggression, and nobody is pure defense. We all are somewhere in the middle, right? And typically what will happen is you actually change it up. I'm never always fighting in the same like aggression level. I'll change throughout the fight. It'll change in a single fight. It'll change over a series of fights. It can change over the course of a day, right? This all plays, like, there's a whole bunch of factors on how tired you are, how familiar I am with my opponent, stuff like this. And then, if I'm really aggressive and Sean begins to be defensive, and then I switch to being more defensive, and now Sean has to be more aggressive, right? Sean's now being more aggressive. What happens? Then I can be more aggressive, and then maybe Sean, pulls it back. There's like this push and pull game that you'll play. And so you're going to have to figure that out for yourself. Typically when I'm in tournaments, I'll fight and I'll start throwing, and then if my opponent doesn't throw, okay, I'll throw more. I can be in A range if they don't feel comfortable in A range. That's a really great place for me because I really like A range. I can be up here and throw these really aggressive shots. But then, maybe the first time in A range, I caught Sean off guard. And then maybe I win that fight, that spar, whatever. And then now we reset. I step close to A range and Sean's ready. And I get killed. Right. Oh, okay. I played into a trap. I now have to think about, how do I respond? Maybe don't throw into A range. Maybe like throw some more setups to get them to move their guard or whatever. So this all kind of plays into the strategy of the overarching fight, over the series of fights, over the series of the day. If you know somebody is really defensive and they're really focused on blocking, which I think a lot of people are in amp guard, I like to use that to my advantage. One, because I'm fast, I can throw this fake and throw, for the hip, or throw low, right? I always talk about, like in my combos and setups and other classes, do the X format for the combos, right? Throw high, boom, money, right? Or throw over, down. If I know they're defensive, they're going to be more prioritized with blocking the shot. Like with board, or if we're fighting single, this is a much more like easier concept to get because I have to commit to a block much more, right? If Sean throws, I have to block this, or else, maybe I block it with my arm, but now I'm 1 point down. I have to follow up, right? But that's risky. Typically, with people when they're fighting single sword, if they're gonna block, they're gonna put everything into that block, and you can see that. Like, I'll fake people out where I'll throw this and they'll go really far, and then I just follow up, right? Single sword is kind of the extreme and the easiest way to apply offensive and defensive fighting. Like, if Sean is really aggressive, I'm going to have to focus on defending more. Maybe I'll be able to return like off time or in Sean's like couple of retractions, but with single, you have to commit more to the block, and so you can use that to your advantage. I bring this up because with board and Florentine to an extent, you have a blocking mechanism. I don't have to fully commit to a block, like throw for my hip. I don't have to do this. I don't have to bring my sword and my shield down. I can just throw, right? So board can change the dynamic a bit where you can be defensive and offensive at the same exact time. So this sort of stuff, you're not going to be able to apply right away. You're going to have to think about it. You're going to have to figure out, how you are as a fighter, what your typical style is. Once you are comfortable with that, you can begin to think about, well, you don't have to do that first, but it helps, at least for me. Then you begin thinking about, how do I, figure out and learn what my opponent's style is going to be, and then you build your strategy. So hopefully those are the concepts that you can get away or take away from this video, from this class, and hopefully you can apply it in your fighting. Well, that's all I have for today, and thank you for your time and attention, and I look forward to seeing you all in my next Newb to Warlord series. Thanks.